But now they're doing some really interesting things where quite literally there was a study that was just published where, people would type and it would use the non-invasive brain mapping essentially to finish, the email or whatever it might be. If we could help resolve, if we could provide information and help people kind of overcome these 12 behavioral essentially states, then we could potentially solve 40% of dementia cases worldwide, which is a massive, massive number.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm your AI host, Marc Verbankov's deepfake avatar, and this is episode number 194. In this episode, Marc is joined by Thoryn Stephens, a molecular biologist turned neurotech entrepreneur, to explore the powerful intersection of biology, technology, and human potential. They discuss how microhabits and personalized protocols can enhance cognitive health and extend health span, and the rise of brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, that could reshape everything from memory to mobility. Thoryn shares stories of working with Olympic athletes, explains how AI can drive thousands of scientifically grounded behavior changes, and reflects on the ethical questions posed by connecting the human brain to the internet. From digital overload to spinal-computer interfaces, this is a fascinating look into the future of the brain. About the guest. Thoryn Stephens is the founder and CEO of Brain.one, an AI-powered brain fitness platform designed to enhance cognitive performance through microhabits, biometric tracking, and personalized behavioral insights. With a foundation in biotechnology and molecular biology, he launched his career in scientific research, contributing to drug development efforts targeting cardiovascular and infectious diseases. Over the past 2 decades, Thoryn has built a dynamic career at the intersection of data science, digital innovation, and consumer behavior. He has held strategic roles at Amgen, Cytokinetics, Unilever, Prestige, and Fox Networks, where he drove growth through advanced analytics, predictive modeling, and personalized technology solutions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Thoryn, for coming on to the podcast today. We've touched on neurotechnology a number of times on the podcast, and it's honestly one of my favorite topics to have. So thanks for coming on to discuss this again.
Fantastic. Thrilled to be here.
So before we dive into kind of the nitty-gritty details and kind of what the future of this fascinating industry and technology hold, how did you get involved in this? Because it seems like every guest that comes on has kind of a unique story about their journey into this field.
Sure. My background is in molecular and cell biology. I worked in biotech as a bench scientist and researcher for the first half of my career, and then I transitioned into data science. So I've always been very data-centric, and in my 20s, I began training for initially just running, started off doing 10Ks, and then I went to half marathons, and then ultimately to triathlon. And it was when I was training for triathlon that I began to use data ultimately in wearables and in that concept of using data to optimize my biology. And again, it's a molecular biologist and a biologist, that was very interesting to me. And as I started to use heart rate, with the early big chunky Garmin's, I could attenuate my lactic threshold by going stronger and further and, measure it actually. You could actually see, that movement of your lactic threshold as an example. And that was a very much, I think, kind of the starting of this journey, and that idea of using data to optimize your biology. And, what's so fascinating about the world we live in today is that we are literally the generation that's seeing the intersection of biology with machines. Just this morning, I had a guest on my podcast named Dr. Galen Buckwalter, who has 6 brain-computer interfaces, and we can talk about that in depth. But so it's a very fascinating time to be alive. And that was kind of the beginning of using data. And then as a data scientist, and then ultimately within my company, the concept of using protocols, and our feeling is that, the future of human health is really personalized human health protocols and micro habits that drive continuous incremental improvement is what we say, right? And that idea that you have these small incremental changes that when added up, really can improve, your health span, optimally in a number of areas, whether it's, sleep, whether it's in mental health, all of these things. So very much a holistic approach, but the protocol is really the backbone and, of that framework, essentially.
Super interesting. Um, so I have an old friend that has kind of also been doing what you did, right? Using the Garmin watches and all these kind of data tracking
Sure.
to improve his marathon running and biking races, I believe he was doing, right? So
Cool.
I haven't really talked about it on the podcast before, and I'm going somewhere with this. So he was talking about, incremental improvements, but then also at certain points there would be large improvements in, say, his marathon or half marathon times.
Yep.
Um, I want to start us off there in order to kind of lay a bit of foundation or have a bit of context for what we're going to be talking about, brain health, and how those kinds of improvements can be done. Could you, for maybe some of the audience members and myself that don't know about the actual numbers of improvements that say you saw or that athletes are seeing, like, are we seeing 1 to 2% improvements in, say, marathon times or whatever sport that you're doing, or is there something substantially greater that we're seeing by actually tracking the data?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually case studies on this. There's Olympic teams that have started off with this concept of doing these incremental improvements that have literally, gone to the podium. So it's pretty tried and true. So from that perspective, what else? Yeah, I think that, I mean, again, for me personally, the concept of like following a protocol. So, as an example, like when I was Ironman training, this is giving you a framework that's breaking up your, essentially your micro habits, but the things that you're doing, swim, bike, running, and then also your nutrition, and then also your hydration, and then all your supplementation. And it's really kind of the amalgamation of that plan, at scale through your training that is laying the foundation for that one race day where you're really going to accelerate. Did that answer the question?
Yeah. Yes. So we're seeing these improvements with kind of, physical athletic performances. You said that you've been doing this for a number of years. The technology has obviously improved over that time period?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I guess when you started doing this compared to what it is now, how
Sure.
much of a leap have we seen? I'm assuming what, 15 years, something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I did my first Ironman. It was my 30th birthday present for myself. And I'm currently 46. So 16 years ago, first Ironman. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say it really comes down to the resolution of measurement, to be very specific. Back in the day, again, you had these big chunky Garmins and, you only got a couple metrics out of it. Now you're getting a multitude, anywhere from HRV to your, average heart rate. I mean, it's like, more metrics than most people can actually utilize.
Mhm.
That said, there's also limitations with the wearables, like, as an example, I use Aura for sleep because it's, small, non-invasive, lower EMF. And then I use Garmin, for any advanced training. And then I use my Apple Watch Ultra for my day-to-day. And, so as you get into each of the devices, it really just depends on this, particular metric or, how they're collecting the data. Are they using sampling, relative to, again, the resolution of that metric?
Mhm.
If we take that a step forward relative to brain, brain measurement is a spectrum. And over here, you have the concept of like cognition tests. So Center for Brain Health out of UT Dallas, they've been doing this stuff for 30 years. Nearly all of their research has been within self-report. So you're doing a cognition test and then you're doing, follow-ups over time. And that really is the basis for a lot of these studies, which is why, we were talking with them about, the use of wearables as an example. So you have, self-report, you have wearables, and then you get into biomarkers. And there's a number of, FDA approved neurological tests that are out there. One's called brain span, that essentially is cognition plus biomarkers, so subjective and objective testing essentially. So you can look at 6 biomarkers at this moment in time. You could do a brain one protocol, and then you could see, do you improve on those biomarkers over that period of time, 6 months or so. And so it's really the measure, I'd say the resolution of measurement that's improved immensely. And then for biomarkers, you can go into imaging, and you have EEG, QEEG, all the way through ultimately to BCI, which really is, the highest resolution of brain measurement today.
Right. Okay, so if we're going to carry forward this analogy of measuring data, bio data within sports, we're now going into brain measurement, brain activity measurement, and brain health. How do we use this data to improve our, well, I'm assuming like brain health can also be synonymous with like mental health, or are these two kind of different fields that we're talking about?
I look at them as pretty different, to be honest. The challenge with mental health in general is, how do you measure someone's happiness? You can't really do that through a biomarker per se. I mean, ish, but not really, right? And so again, to the prior point, most mental health clinical assessments were based on general anxiety and depression 7. GAD-7 is the gold standard for anxiety and depression. That's entirely self-report. And it's, how are you feeling today? How are you progressing over time? And so forth. So a lot of the ketamine assisted psychotherapy or psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, types of frameworks essentially would use something like a GAD-7 or PHQ-9, these things for like deeper either anxiety, depression, or it could be other areas of mental health. And that's really the challenge with mental health. So when we talk about brain health, there's actually a higher resolution of measurement. Now you can literally go and get an EEG at least measurement done at the coffee shop. For 20 minutes, you wear a brain cap, you come back, you get 20 pages of data. It's not going to be as high as, resolution as, let's say, QEEG or some of the other tools, but it is a good indication relative to, your brain and, the different quadrants of the brain and, function and so forth. So it's really come quite a long way, and especially with these types of brain EEG caps that, now you can quite literally do anywhere.
Right. There's I think I had some guests on in the past talking about like consumer tech that you can just buy,
Yep.
order, maybe not off of Amazon, but you can certainly have it, shipped to your house, put it on, and you can start tracking brain activity, which is,
Oh, yeah.
sci-fi, sci-fi that's turning into real world. It's pretty wild stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The concept of, again, non-invasive, and then you have, invasive, essentially BCI, right? And so non-invasive, it's these types of brain caps. But now they're doing some really interesting things where quite literally there was a study that was just published where, people would type and it would use the non-invasive brain mapping essentially to like finish, the email or whatever it might be. And it's only becoming higher resolution. So it's really that measurement, that resolution piece that continues to get better. If we want to drive in a little bit deeper to BCIs, I can talk a bit further about that.
Uh,
Um,
I mean, for me, BCI is always like a little bit more of the crazier things when we're like, I mean, obviously Neuralink is the one that's known very well, but there are, shall we say, some conspiratorially minded people that listen to the podcast, and they have
okay.
they request questions about that. So maybe at the end of the discussion, we could
Sure. Yeah, let's
touch
go.
on that.
No, I just had a conversation around this today. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, but so then going back to your point around, mental and then brain health. So, definitely different. When we think about brain health, there are certain biomarkers we can look at, right? So things like omega-3 index, DHA, palmitic acid, trans fat, vitamin D levels, these you can literally get out of a FDA approved test today, to measure those biomarkers. And that combined with cognition tests around memory, attention, processing speed, and so forth can give you a executive function, a really good baseline relative to where your brain is functioning today. And then there are things you can do to optimize from there, right? And so what are those types of things? And we have protocols I can share with you from Brain One. But, environmental and behavioral modifications are, a huge component of that, right? If you've ever seen, have you read the Lancet 2020 study? Have you heard the hypothesis that dementia is preventable?
I think so. Yeah.
So it's generally based on this. If you just Google Lancet 2020, initially the study came out in 17. It was actually just republished in 24, but generally renowned as the Lancet 2020. And they basically looked at, a pretty large data set. And what they found was that they could really, there are 12 what we call modifiable risk factors that, if we could help resolve, if we could provide information and help people kind of overcome, these 12 behavioral, essentially states, then we could potentially solve 40% of dementia cases worldwide, which is like a massive, massive number. And especially with this aging population, our parents are absolutely terrified of this, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's. And the thing with dementia is that it's generally accepted, if you can modify your behavior, then you can stave off dementia. Even with Alzheimer's, where you have a genetic predisposition, you can stave off the effects, again, with, certain levels of, behavioral modifications is the point. And so that's very fascinating, that concept that through, these behavioral environmental changes, myself as a molecular biologist, in the lab, I mean, we used to, joke that like 60 to 70% of your gene expression, it is dependent on your environment. You have a genetic predisposition, but it doesn't necessarily mean, that that gene is actually expressed. And I was part of the early age, I graduated in 2000. So like we just sequenced the human genome, and that was like all the rage. But then I was like, oh, wait, what about proteomics? What about, DNA, RNA, proteins? And then what's even more fascinating to me is the transcriptome. It's everything happening in between. And that exactly is that gene expression, the expression of your DNA to RNA. And so that's also extremely fascinating. But that you can, these types of diseases, again, the impacts of environment are absolutely everything.
So I mean, it sounds fascinating. So is the goal here have the brain data, understand the protocols that need to be implemented in order to improve your brain health, stave off dementia, and who knows, maybe some other diseases that we claimed are incurable, and
Yeah.
improve the longevity of, well, maybe not just the longevity, but the quality of life of people in later age and, midlife as well?
And do you mean for Brain One specifically, like ours?
Yeah, I mean,
Or-
let's get into brain one. I was talking more at a
Yeah.
industry level, but I think that this is also what you guys are trying to do, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think it depends, right? And I have to be a little bit careful here. Again, I worked in biotechnology for many years as a bench scientist. I worked with Glaxo. And so I've seen the pharmaceutical machine. And I think there's absolutely a time and a place for pharmaceuticals. And I think they can be, life-saving. I also think they can be completely overprescribed. And so personally, I try to take as many as little pharmaceuticals on a daily basis as possible, just period. And that's just kind of a personal, value that I hold. So all of that to say, taking a step back. So Brain One, we were going down this road, and initially we were focused on brain fitness. So the concept of, us being relatively healthy humans, how do we measure our current state, and then how do we improve over time, essentially just similar to triathlon and, some of the examples you gave earlier. In doing that from a protocol perspective. And so what is a protocol? A protocol is just a routine. It's a regimen. When I was in the lab synthesizing DNA, we would follow a protocol. It's no different than making cookies in your kitchen. You're following a protocol. It's a series of steps. And so, one of the questions I usually ask people is like, do you have a daily routine? And if so, what is your daily routine? And I don't know if you have one, Mark.
Sure.
Yeah. Anything you want to share?
Get up and work. No.
Well,
No. It's a little bit more elaborate. So, get up, meditate, do a cold plunge, take some vitamins, do a little bit of exercise, grab some green tea and then get to work. More or less like that.
great. Awesome. Yeah. So for me, wake up, some level of gratitude, sunlight, hydration. And, again, I follow a very regimented set every day, more or less. And it also depends if you're traveling and things. But when I'm here in Colorado, fairly regimented. And so that's one of the first things that we support at Brain One is the idea that you have a routine, let's just document it. What is that? And then are there additional goals that you may have? that could be supported. So things like better sleep, or it could be higher energy, or reducing brain fog, or whatever it might be. And so we've assembled a list of essentially protocols that are based on peer-reviewed scientific papers. And don't get me wrong, it's not absolutely foolproof. I understand,
Sure.
of different biases and so forth, and we can get into that. But at least it's a framework that we have started to build upon, that is based in science, ultimately. And so that concept, where we were taking these peer-reviewed papers like this Lancet 2020, we run it through our AI, and we develop an editorial. And so the editorial takes, like in that case, the 12 modifiable risk factors, and puts it into a very easy, digestible, essentially just read, that anyone, our grandparents could read and understand. And so that's kind of one aspect of the AI. And the other is then developing an actual protocol, again, of these risk factors, including, things like nutrition, could include supplements, and so forth. And the vision is, so imagine if, we could, by following, the protocol for these 12 risk factors, if we could give that out to 1 billion humans, how many people's lives we could change. And so for me, part of it is just education. People don't know. And some of these modifiable risk factors, they're fairly simple, as an example, like the power of connection. If you have purpose and connection, and you wake up in the morning and you're excited, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be, gardening, it could be meeting with your family, it could be skiing, or connecting with a group of humans. But having that sense of purpose and then a sense of connection will increase your life expectancy by, X number of years. I mean, it's pretty substantial. So that would kind of be one example of a micro habit, could be improving your connection, or, really understanding purpose, things along those lines. Another like small hack that, is really evangelized by the Center for Brain Health is the idea of not multitasking. There's a lot of evidence, we as humans, and don't get me wrong, it's like you've got your phone, you've got your computer, TV's on, da, da, da. That's like the most inefficient, potentially from a neurological perspective, you can be at getting a certain thing done, because you're on your phone, you're on your computer, as opposed to, let's say, you're doing whatever, 3 things at once, you could do 3 things for 20 minutes, for an hour, and you will actually cognitively be a higher performer. And there's a good amount of research and data around that. So these are the types of micro habits that we have built protocols around that, ultimately we're giving out to the broader audience, so they can follow at least as a framework. And some people track every single day. Some people look at it once a week. They do it digitally. Some people are printing out our protocols and putting them on the fridge. I don't really care. I mean, the tracking is obviously important, but it's really that at least they have an understanding of this structured framework and how it can impact their lives. And, they're trying to put these pieces in place.
Very interesting. I think from several of the other conversations I've had on this podcast, especially recently, the last, say,
Sure.
4 or 6 months, a lot of guests have come on to talk about social media and the impact of, I don't want to just broadly say our digital technology, but, social media in particular, and how it's degraded. And I'm sure you and most of the audience members have, very well aware of just how impacted our brains are. TikTok brain, I think, is a common term that we're using now. Do you see Brain One and these protocols that you're coming up with as kind of a fight against this for the people that are, actively pursuing it?
I mean, 100%. As a data scientist, so like, in 2010, 11, 12, this is when MySpace was going down, Facebook was coming up. And this is back when the Facebook API was totally open. You could download everything, the social graphs, everything so I remember those days, and I was literally, building these analytical systems. And what I saw was how nefarious, this data and the technology could be used, right? Like, we were the generation that gave away all of our behavioral data, basically, like, hey, I'm going to connect with my, someone I don't really even know from high school or junior high or whatever. And it was under the guise of connection. And really what we were doing was giving away all of our behavioral data, and it was being harvested and so forth. And I'm not conspiratory, but I was, I've been on the front lines and I was seeing how it was being used. And, I deleted my Facebook account in like 2016. I mean, and never looked back. I have to use Instagram for work, and I try not to keep it on my phone. I literally don't have it on my phone right now. And
Right.
WhatsApp, is not much better. So yeah, I mean, so as an example, right, like, we have micro habits in our protocols that could be reflective of that. I think a really good metric is things like, who among your friends has the least amount of screen time? Like, that's cool, right? doing digital detoxes, not looking at any digital media, let alone news or social, 2 hours before bed, So these are all micro habits that we've incorporated in protocols exactly for that reason.
Right. Um, what percentage of the population do you think? Well, I think like everybody should be doing these kinds of things, but as these platforms, these social media platforms are getting more and more powerful, and I think also their addictive capabilities are getting much more profound, right? I think they have like or Facebook has like an entire department focused on like where to put the like button or what colors and what shades to use in order to trigger our um well, I think this is up your alley more than mine, but you can trigger kind of your instincts to
Of
get
course.
more addicted to these kinds of things.
Yep.
What like do you maybe the better question is, do you think that there's going to be a tipping point where people are just like so addicted to this and their lives are getting ruined and they're like, okay, I need to cut this off completely. Where do I go? Like, what kind of protocol should I be implementing to do better? Yeah. What's your perspective on this?
I mean, I think we're getting close to a tipping point. One of the protocols that we have a team member at Brain One, she's in her early 20s. She helped us pioneer was around the concept of bed rotting. Have you followed this? Oh my gosh, Google it.
I haven't heard
The,
this.
con-
No.
the concept, and it's honestly, it's very tragic, right? These are kids, generally, I mean, it's age, independent, but like, let's say 15 to 20s. And they call it bed rotting because you're literally sitting in bed scrolling. And you're scrolling I mean, like, for days, and so it's, I mean, I'm sure there's a connection to depression and other, mental health conditions, but it's absolutely tragic. Like, people, kids are not even leaving their bedrooms and they're just scrolling on social, and digital channels. So we developed a protocol around that, and at least it's a step in the right direction. Is it 100%? It's not, but at least it's getting there, and it'll learn and get better, over time. So I think we are reaching that critical mass, to be honest,
Mm,
Mark.
mm,
And which is why, side note, I mean, I'm a data scientist. I've been in the digital domain forever. What we're also seeing with our protocols is people, and generally older, but they want to print them out, and they want to put them in a notebook, and then they like check off the thing every day.
right.
And so
Right.
part of this is meeting people where they're at, but it doesn't need to be entirely digital. If they want, they can then take a picture and then, send it in, and then we can upload it to the profile and get the tracking and da da da. But that's, again, not even my biggest concern. It's just that they have this structured framework to follow, and ultimately we're meeting them where they're at, And so, yeah, we've absolutely heard that from people. You can build the best digital systems in the world, but there is something about being analog or being, offline for some of these things as well.
Yeah. Yeah. My brother just had his first child, and there's all the discussion around whether this kid is going to have an iPad, or what do they call it, like an iPad nanny or something like that. You be these clips, now the social media, now that it's, my phone has heard, talk about grandchildren and aunts and uncles and stuff like that. I'm getting a lot of clips about babies or young toddlers freaking out about when the iPad is taken away. So maybe this is
Yeah.
also part of this threshold where, my generation is, starting having kids and realizing just how damaging these kinds of technologies can be, even though it gives you, an hour or two to I don't know, cook dinner or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. My quick, I don't have kids yet, but I would say it needs to be significantly moderated
Yeah.
is my perspective. And I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I grew up in a household where my mother, she never had sugar cereals, as an example, So, like, we always wanted sugar cereals and Lucky Charms, and da da da, but she would never buy them. She would, there's like certain things, preservatives. I mean, like foods with preservatives, not a lot of meat. And it's, it shapes your worldview on things. I mean, that said, I eat
Sure.
meat now and red meat and all the things, but it's I think your environment that you grow up in really helps, ultimately shape these things. And how much time are you spending outside in nature with, your feet on the ground, running around in the forest versus, in your bedroom on your phone.
Rotting.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So slightly terrifying, but I do believe that, there again, and we haven't developed protocols for kids yet, but we've been asked, and that's the perfect example. Like, and I don't know enough about that specific research, but there's enough out there, right? And what is the ideal time, and what does that look like relative to rationing how much time per day? and so forth. But I don't know, I look at it as like a digital pacifier. My parents didn't allow pacifiers, but some parents do, because it pacifies the child. It keeps them busy when you're doing your other things.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe there's an analogy there.
Interesting. Okay. So we've gotten the context, we've gotten the potential solution, or one of the path. What are some of the challenges that you guys have come up against creating something like this? Now, you mentioned like artificial intelligence. Is that also one of the things that, like, one of the building blocks that needed to be created in order for your company to kind of come about and function?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've been using AI for, years. I mean, there's case studies of me when I was, a digital officer for a major fashion retailer like 10 years ago, using dynamic creative optimization, for da da da. Actually this morning I interviewed Dr. Galen Buckwalter. He and I go back decades. He was a chief scientist at eHarmony. eHarmony was using production level, AI, like literally it started in like the 2000s, So AI in my world is not new. Is it true machine learning? Is it AI? I mean, there's so much buzzword and so much bullshit out there. And this isn't new either. I mean, literally the companies have been saying AI for years, decades, So none of that is new, but I guess I take a very embracive approach, right? I feel like if you don't embrace the technology, it will absolutely leave you behind. But that said, it's so the way we look at our AI perspective, it's like AI generated but human approved, or we're taking a scientific paper, we're running it through the AI, but every single thing that we produce is human approved. We have an Oxford PhD neuroscientist that reviews every article before they go out. And so that concept of human in the loop, I'm sure you've heard of.
Yep.
So like, again, like that is how you build these things at scale. And so as an example with Brain One, we have thousands of these micro habits, essentially cards in a database, right? What does that mean? Well, mindful meditation could be one, right? You click on mindful meditation, it pops up a card, we have an image, we have an overview of what it is, we have an overview of how to do it, and then we're adding video. We have thousands of these. There's no way I could possibly do this without using AI intelligently. And again, it's all science backed. So we're taking a slightly more rigorous approach. We're not saying, hey, generate an article on dementia risk reduction to Chat GPT. We're taking a scientific paper, we're feeding it in, and then we're summarizing it, and then we're citing it. So everything we build is citing. And again, that's not, it's not totally perfect, impervious, but at least it's a step in that direction. And so that's for editorial, that's for, for imagery, it's now for videos, we're playing with avatars, but, very, very embracive of AI. And it's also the way I've been able to build my company, instead of hiring, 50 people. I mean, we have a very small team of less than a dozen, and in the throughput, so when I'm going to my team, I'm like, hey, don't give me 10 articles, give me 1,000. And we literally went from, 5, rigorously testing the models, testing tone, testing the different types, and then found one. And then we went to 10 articles, 100. Now we have 1,000 of these editorial articles, based in this, this concept of, again, using cited papers. And that's how we're thinking about it. Same with the cards. I'm like, hey guys, I don't want 1,000 images. We need like 5,000, and they need to be contextually relevant. They need to look realistic. I mean, all of those things. And so we've been, training these models for, over a couple of years now. But again, working in the tech for much longer.
Super interesting. Should we move? I'm also aware of the time here. Should we give a little bit into the future of what you're seeing? We definitely have to talk about BCI tech at some point in this. So if we get like a large percentage of the population following, whether it's Brain One, or I'm sure there's competitors out there that are doing kind of these great brain health protocols, like what kind of second order effects, maybe we can start off with, do you think would happen, right? Rather than like dementia maybe curving down, do you see like the economy getting better? Like what are some other potential things that you guys have come up with?
I mean, there's a number of studies around this, and literally the billions of dollars at stake, around specifically. And again, we started off in brain fitness, so optimization, of the brain. And then we talk about, brain health, which is more neurodegeneration, dementia, Alzheimer's, and so forth. And so we look at each of these areas of health differently. But there's absolutely studies specific to neurodegeneration and brain health. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars in the aging population. I mean, this is going to impact more and more people. There was literally a study today that came out in Apple News. share it with you right now.
Yeah,
That is
please.
exactly on this. The reason dementia rates are rising, and but also an air of optimism. I mean, there are things that we can do here, fundamentally. And again, it comes down to the modifiable risk factors that I mentioned earlier. I mean, this is an initial step. And the other thing is too, you know, Mark, I don't know how old you are, but what, 30s, early
Yeah,
30s?
late
No,
30s.
late 30s. Okay. So like these things, we should be starting now. You don't want to be starting your dementia, optimization when you're in your 60s. Now, if you're 60, that's fine. Get started. Like there's no, you're never too late. But like these are things relative to just overall fitness, you want to start immediately. And so these basic principles you could start putting, into your daily routines and into your lifestyle that could be so far impacting. So yeah, I mean, I think there's billions of dollars at stake, which is not why we're in it, but also, billions of human lives, as well. And, and some of these are fairly simple. Some of them are, really hard to overcome. So, could be nutrition and preservatives and, where you live and things like that. But I'm at least optimistic.
Yeah. I like this idea of maybe not lengthening your thanks. Yeah, I see that. I'll put that in the show notes. Maybe not
Awesome.
lengthening the time that you're on this planet, but rather improving the quality of time that you're on this planet, right? So you're not
Yep.
like my dieta, my grandfather, he passed away when I was very young, but he suffered dementia in his old age.
Yep.
And like I heard some of the stories, he was paranoid of people coming in and stealing food out of his fridge and something like that. So the last couple of years were not very pleasant at all.
Sure.
And I'm sure that, you know, we're living longer because of whether it's the medical industry or some of the technologies that we have or tools, et cetera. You want to have those last years um, enjoyable, pleasurable.
Yep.
I don't know, there's so much knowledge that people have in that they go throughout life. Would it not be beneficial to be able to share that because you're actually capable and competent and I don't know, go on the board of directors or something like, there's lots of opportunities.
Sure.
Um, yeah, no, super interesting.
I mean, 100%. I think, the concept again of health span versus lifespan, I'm sure you're
Yes.
familiar with, right? And, in those curves, and so what you're really solving for is that last period of time. And I think someone who really speaks of this eloquently is Peter Attia, a longevity MD expert. And, and again, you're really trying to make those last years as, healthy as you can. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree. And, whether it's Huberman, it's Attia, I mean, what we do at Brain One, it all comes down to these same, core pillars of health, and it's going to be the things like hydration, nutrition, exercise. Again, those are more macro habits, and then we break them down into micro habits. But it's all the same pillars. It just depends on how you interpret it and how you incorporate them into your daily life.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, absolutely, the concept of health span is awesome. And that's something we really believe in evangelize as well.
Cool. Should we broach BCI tech now?
Yeah, let's do it. Wait, I don't. So why? But where's the reticence? Is it because of the audience? Is it because of your personal background?
No, I try to stay as neutral as possible. So like my bias, I'm a podcast host. I try not to pollute the
Sure.
waters too much, but I certainly get a lot of comments about whether it's well founded or not. I don't know, but there's certainly a lot of comments that come in like, well, this is the way for corporations or governments to control our brains, right? If we're being loosely controlled now through social media, if the technology is actually embedded physically into your brain, what's there to stop? Like, what are the barriers to stop whether, nefarious organizations or governments from maybe not controlling, but certainly having more significant influence on the way that we actually think rather than just the thoughts that are entering our mind. So I've heard a lot of comments like that. And, I'm I don't completely shut them down. Let's say.
Right. And they're not totally wrong. I mean, right? Like, just as we saw this wave of, this mass collection of behavioral data that we all gave away for nothing, big tech, are they coming after your brain data? Well, sure. I mean, there's certainly some companies. I met with a company recently that has essentially a, in-app earbud that has, a very, very basic, essentially, EEG. And And that's going to become more and more prevalent. So I think there are reasons to be wary. And, so I don't think there's, I agree with that. I also think, there's a lot of ways the technology can be used for good. So just example this morning. So a member of my team, his name's Dr. Galen Buckwalter. Galen is a storied AI scientist and also sings in a punk band, and he's in a wheelchair, and so Galen is a quadriplegic. When he was 17, he jumped off a bridge, hit a rock, and he's been paralyzed ever since. And so his expression in the world has been science and punk rock, which I just love. And so Galen, he qualified for a clinical trial at Caltech, and he has 6 neural arrays on his brain tissue right now. There's 5 in the neocortex, 1 in the prefrontal cortex. And he's technically the most connected human on the planet that we know of. Neuralink gets all of the publicity. This specifically, it's the Utah array from BlackRock Neuro out of Utah. And, they've been doing this work for decades. Neuralink gets all the press, but these guys have been doing it too, and generally it's a similar concept. And so Galen's a very dear friend of mine. He's a member of Brain One. He's our chief brain futurist is his title, right? And, so he has 6 of these neural arrays. And why did he do it? So we talked about it this morning. He's not going to see the benefit per se, of this science, but he's laying the foundation. He's the first human, I think, in history to actually have one in the prefrontal cortex that's both because these arrays, they record data, the electrical impulses, but then they also emit. And so it's both. And, I think he's the first in history in the prefrontal cortex specifically. And it's just amazing research. And so I've been with him at Caltech. I saw the pictures, they took off a huge chunk of his skull. And you see these arrays, they're 8 by 8 nodes. So there's 64, and he has 6 of these on his brains. And these things are like, they're pretty sharp. So not necessarily. Yeah, when you see him live, and I actually saw him in his skull, and then and then they have wires. So he has 3 PEDs on top of his skull. And then, we're at Caltech for one of his clinical trials, and I'm there with him, and he's doing these brain training exercises. And so then they screw on these, essentially these interfaces that then connect him to the internet. And so I have videos of this. There's some things I can share, but it's absolutely incredible. And so what does that mean? Well, he's doing the research because he wants to help other people, that are had an unfortunate accident like him, right? And so brain-computer interfaces. Now, what's next are spinal-computer interfaces. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I haven't. No, that makes sense.
It's related, but it's technically embedded into the spine, and Galen is leading the charge here. And I have to say, my team at Brain One, they're such amazing humans. And, just across the board. And Galen is just, like literally the most connected human on the planet at the moment, which is just so fascinating. And then he's getting connected to the internet, And so it's for the reason that he's, they're doing the clinical trials, controlling in a robotic arm with his, with his brain, basically, and showing awesome progress. And these are parts of his brain he hasn't used, in 15 years, since, the accident. And they're still firing. And it's like blowing, the researchers away. So it's been really cool to see that firsthand at Caltech. But then it does raise some other ethical, questions and concerns. As an example, I also play music. And so Galen and I have done a punk song, and we're releasing a punk song in about a month, and he's in the wheelchair, and he's singing on the mic, and he's singing and then controlling a synthesizer with a BCI at the same time. I swear to God.
Crazy.
It's incredible, right? And it's, that's more of a fun application. But when we were working on the song and the video, we ran into issues with Caltech where he couldn't actually get access to his brain, like the brain data, the brain signals and so forth. And so we had to go some roundabout ways, but we were able to get some of the signal. We were able to record him singing, and then, but there was, we couldn't actually get the audio in any way. Not to get into it.
Sorry. This is a technological connection problem, not a policy.
No, it's policy.
Oh, it's a policy. Okay.
Yeah.
That is.
It's literally data governance. But at the same time, he didn't really sign an informed consent, so it's an interesting case. But he authorized them to put these neural chips, onto his brain, and he did give away something. And so, but unfortunately, he doesn't have access to that data right now. And it's not just him. There's actually a consortium. There's there's not many. I think there's something like 40 people known with BCIs, but there's a group called BCI pioneers that are really, getting into this level of data governance. Who owns the data? Well, shouldn't it be you? But, if they put in the arrays, I mean, definitely with Neuralink, there's no way. I can promise you do not own the data, but they're also a biotech company, So yeah, but this is something, we're really going through right now with Galen and, in his process. But it is, it's absolutely, fascinating from that perspective that he could be singing and controlling synthesizer simultaneously.
Yeah,
And it's the future.
That's crazy. Yeah, well, but this is the thing, right? This sounds like sci-fi in 20 years, but it's happening now.
Right now.
Which I think, yeah.
We're the generation again, it's
Yeah.
the fusion of biology and machines. And myself as a molecular biologist, I mean, I find this so fascinating, and we're seeing it literally right now. And so it's fascinating. And I'm generally an optimist. Obviously, there's many reasons to be cautious in all these things. As a molecular biologist, we can get into CRISPR and a lot of the things happening on that side. But, it's like all technology can be used for good or bad. But I do feel it's important to embrace it and understand it before you can, really help provide.
Well, it's going to happen whether you want it or not, right? There's powerful forces, economic, interest, there's motivations, shall we say, for this to go forward. And I think it's, this is why I personally love doing this podcast, because I hear about, like, I hadn't heard about a spinal, well, it's not a brain computer interface, but a spinal computer interface.
Spine computer interface, literally.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And happening right now.
Is that in order? Well, actually, I don't know. Can you explain what the value of that is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert, but it's the concept again of if someone has their spinal cord severed, is there a mechanism to, basically, have that connection ultimately reestablished on some level, right?
Yeah.
That's the vision. And related to BCI, I mean, it's interesting. Ultimately, it's nerves and electrical impulses, and so the two are closely aligned. But obviously, one is specific to the spine. So
yeah, I need to go back to this data governance point. I'm going to be thinking about this for days, right? So not you, but like the general population might not have access to their own brain data. I think it's. I don't have the right terminology here, but like the data that we're giving Facebook right now, it's our social data. And that was a big step, I think, for people, but we didn't really care about that all that much, right? Like you just click the terms of service. Yeah, whatever, accept, go.
But I don't think we knew, though. I mean, that's the point.
Maybe.
Didn't care, but we also didn't really know how it was being used, right? Truly. People are, again, it was kind of under the guise connecting with your classmates from junior high. Connections, social, but like we didn't really know we'd be training models that then could be used nefariously for our children, to watch more videos, right? I mean, that wasn't known.
Yeah, true. I get this. So I agree with you, but I also get the sense that for, say, the layperson or the average person out there, that's maybe too many steps to think about. Whereas brain data, it's immediate, right? You understand it immediately, like, oh, you're going to read my brain, you're going to be able to read my thoughts. Like that is, I think it's shall we say, it's an order of magnitude in difference and potential fear for people, and might be, I would think, one of the points of hesitation to have this kind of technology adopted at scale. I don't know if it's ever going to get past that, if we should get past that, if this is, I don't know. There's too many things running around through my brain. You've fried me out a little bit. This is awesome.
Awesome. Appreciate that. I mean, yeah, there's a difference between reading your brain data, though, and then reading your thoughts. We can't read your thoughts. We could have, of course, read the electrical activity going on in the brain in different portions, and then you could maybe, make some assumptions there. And then further, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the difference between non-invasive BCI and BCI, right? I mean, BCI, they're literally drilling holes in your skull. Neuralink, quarter sized, boom, put it in. But the non-invasive stuff is also really cool. But potentially could be nefarious. So I think, in all these things, and there's groups out there that are helping pioneer, regulation around this, like the Neurorights Foundation out of Columbia, doing some good work, similar to, they actually provide here in Colorado, some of the first brain protection legislation that went to California, incorporated into CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, and then international applications. So we're seeing more and more needs for this. But yeah, it's like all the things. I mean, there's positive and negative. And I do think in the case of Galen, I mean, this is completely selfless or altruistic work that he's just doing for the better good of, future humans that maybe, have a spinal issue. But then there's the other side of the coin is like convenience. There's a lot of ways that, again, these non-invasive BCIs can like help you type an email on half the speed. Like that's interesting. You would probably do that. So, I think we're really just, on the kind of the tipping point for a lot of this technology and where it's going. And I think it's exciting. But like all things, we should be skeptical and, we should be very, I think, steadfast in our perspective. So.
Super interesting. I mean, I think I could talk to you all day about this. This is
Let's do it. Yeah, anytime. I'd love to. I get happy to introduce you to Dr. Galen Buckwalter. If you'd like to.
Yeah, I would love to interview him for sure.
Amazing, beautiful human, and happy to make that connection.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I'm noticing the time is pretty much up here, Thoryn.
No problem.
Maybe one final question. So you're saying that we're kind of potentially on this tipping point of having this technology adopted. It sounds like it's going to be, fraught with perils, but also phenomenal for people that have, whether spinal injuries or otherwise. For the day-to-day consumers, you mentioned that, okay, you can put on the non-invasive cap, have your emails written for you, or just think about it. Are there any other ways that you are excited about, like the normal day-to-day activity or just the normal day-to-day life being changed with a phenomenal adoption of this technology? Like our lives have completely changed because of smartphones. I would assume that there's going to be a similar scale and change with this tech.
I mean, so again, I think we're ways away from like full mass adoption. I think the most immediate use case are, it's medical. It's people who are, under certain conditions. What they're starting to experiment with, again, like the majority of Galen's research at Caltech, right? It's excitation, it's measuring the electrical activity in different, portions of the brain, right? So that's interesting. But what is the future? Well, the ability to download, like X, whatever it is, right? It's like literally Neo downloading jujitsu and, like that's coming. There's been some more recent research around that like it's maybe not too far away. Now it's too, not to like learn jujitsu overnight, but that's a pretty interesting, I think, aspect of all of this. And then, one final point I'll make too, is consciousness. Like, what does this mean for the expansion of human consciousness, right? So like throughout the ages, we've had prayer, we've had meditation, like yogis in the caves in Tibet. And now we have BCI, right? And so I'm at a clinical trial at Caltech and I'm watching Galen connect his brain to the internet. And I'm being, it's not really the internet, but it's pretty much the internet, intranet anyway. And, so what does that mean for human consciousness, Mark? And I'll just leave it on that note, right? Like, psychedelics, another example, expanding the human mind. Okay, awesome. Like, but what does that mean, in this case where you're connecting to the internet? So consciousness, my friend, it's where we're going.
Crazy. Well, perfect place to end the podcast. Leave it as an open question there. Thoryn, thank you so much for coming on. I will have Brain One's website up on the show notes. Oh, your LinkedIn profile. Are there any other places that you want people to reach out, follow?
Great.
No?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yep.
Awesome.
Can't
thank you enough. This is the reason that I do the podcast. These are the great conversations. Yeah.
Cool.
Love it.
Appreciate it. Well, stay healthy and look forward to chatting again.
Perfect. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews.
And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.